Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Global Speedrun Association. We got some more Super Mario Odyssey League Race action coming your way. Equan doubleheader. This time he is up against LilKirbs, which is going to be just as formidable, if not more so, than Nitro, the race that he was just in. Joining me on the mic today, we have the one, the only, of Super Mario 64 fame, Electric. How are you doing today?
Doing real good at the moment. Just got off work, ready to party. And what better way to party than with the wedding at the end of this any percent run? We've got Equan, who just had probably one of the most ridiculous outcomes in a race that I've ever seen, at least based on how he started the race. And then, of course, LilKirbs. He needs no introduction. Both these guys, more than capable runners. We'll see what they have in store for us, and we'll see if Equan can somehow manage to pull out another one of those insane runs.
Yep, it's truly heartbreaking, the performance that we just witnessed from Equan. My jaw literally still on the floor after that finish. And you know, we were really hyping up the fact that Nitro was about to be facing his first loss in this entire league, and yet Equan was able to kind of hand it over to him in an unfortunate situation. So, you know, it kind of makes me wonder, in a situation like this with a high stakes race following one right after the other, what has to be going through Equan's mind in a situation like this? Is he scared to go into this next race? Is he going to play it more cautious? It's not very much like Equan to play in that manner. He's usually the one to go kind of risky, but in a situation where he basically just had this race previously shattered for him, what kinds of strategies is he going to go for?
Yeah, I feel like for a lot of people, and especially Equan included, the big question is simply going to be how do I keep going from here? How do I push that out of my head and really truly give myself a good starting point? Because I mean, this is kind of the equivalent of trying to build a house on top of just literal popsicle foundation. It's just not going to be very conducive. You might get it to stand up for 5 seconds, but it may not last. And so I think it's going to be really, really vital for Equan to just recenter, get all of the thoughts of that last race out of his head, and just ultimately play to the best of his ability and best of his consistency. We've got LilKirbs showing off that intro cutscene for us for whatever reason.
Yep, so little known fact about this game, you may or may not be aware, but by restarting the game or loading up a new save, like a new profile, I guess, on the Switch, the very first load of a physical copy of this game does take about 1.5 to 2 seconds longer than it would if it was your second load. So getting that load out of the way for LilKirbs here, just so that he is able to save that 2 seconds. We'll probably see Equan do it as well. But yeah, just a little bit of preparation in advance.
That's pretty interesting, and I run on digital, so I actually never would have known that. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, it doesn't happen on digital for some reason, which is strange. Probably just something about, you know, having to read from the card, making a couple extra points of communication.
And it's kind of interesting how with these newer games we're having to deal with issues like this. Like with SM64, you just shove the card in and go, but even with like digital, for instance, you have to make sure that it's installed on the Switch and not on the micro SD card, because I think you'll lose at least like 15, maybe 30 seconds to loads if it's on SD card.
Yeah, maybe not quite that dramatic, but you do have a point there. And the kind of funny thing about that, absolutely, is that depending on the brand of your SD card, your loads could be drastically different as well, right? It just all depends on how the console itself communicates with that micro SD that can give you some really crazy, insane loads. We've seen some very good SD loads, but we've also seen some very bad ones.
And these guys are off. We're going to be seeing them do that nice little introductory gauntlet of Cap and a Cascade before getting really into the meat of this run. And all eyes, I think, are going to be towards Equan to see how exactly he gets his feet on the ground this time around.
You know, this is a tough day for Equan. He is facing off against two of what I would consider to be the top contenders for this sub-hour, this elusive sub-hour that kind of is looming over everybody's heads in this community right now, with Nitro's 10, I guess, 10010, which is probably what it's going to be retimed to. You know, we are literally 10 seconds away from that being a reality, and LilKirbs being one of the other top contenders, one of the best sum of bests in the game, and it does not surprise me that he is as good as he is and as capable of getting sub-hour as he is. Equan, you know, I think that he is an excellent runner in his own right, but he is a lot more elusive, and you don't really know what he's doing. He could be a top contender and maybe even a sub-hour contender, but we just really don't know. because he doesn't make his efforts very public.
Right, and I think Ekwan, his biggest strength is mostly in races, and I mean with regard to sub hour specifically, it's really pretty much one major discovery away. We already saw the Seaside reroute taking away about 10 seconds or so by itself, and I mean one more discovery like that, and it's pretty well in the bag. And it's kind of interesting to think about how a community decision to, for instance, if we timed from skipping that first cutscene rather than file select, that Nitro run would actually be sub hour. And so it's
Yeah.
really interesting to see how that's progressed throughout time. I still remember when the run was like, I think, a 102 world record, and people were already kind of hyped for sub hour then. So it's been a long time coming, and it'll be really, really amazing when it does happen.
Yeah, when the world record was around a 102, even like a high 102, that was when we had our very first BTT video put together, which, if you're unfamiliar and kind of new to maybe speedrunning, or I don't really know if any other speedrunning communities do it quite like Super Mario Odyssey, there is a very, very high focus on kind of the best theoretical time, especially with the absence of tasks available to us. But essentially, a BTT run is a heavily segmented run, basically from moon to moon, or cutscenes. Even like people submit times for just the mashing in between. A very heavily segmented run where we are looking for the absolute best possible human performance and putting it all into one run. So when the world record was around a 102, that was when we had our very first sub-hour best theoretical time video made. And since then, our best theoretical time, using, of course, very, very hard strats, some that you wouldn't really see in RTA play, the time has gotten down to a 58-minute time, which is absolutely crazy.
Oh yeah, I mean I'm not gonna say sub hour is inevitable with current strats or even just one new discovery, but it's certainly looking fairly unlikely, especially if someone is able to pull off that just really super high level of gameplay consistently. And you do see some other communities with rainbow runs, for instance, where an individual streamer will compile their own golds to do a sort of BTT, but very rarely do you see a huge community like the one that's cropped up for Odyssey, where you have people that just run those basically ILs. I think I'm not sure of their names off the top of my head, but I know there are a few runners that's all that they do. That's all they specialize in, and
Certainly.
they're really good. It really kind of depends on if your main consistency is with a longer like hour category, or if you are just a really insanely good player, but only for those short little bursts of time.
Certainly. And I think that, you do see that. The game actually has kind of a built-in short speedrun game in itself, that being the Koopa freerunning. And you do see a lot of these Koopa freerunning masters that are kind of coming through the woodwork and being the ones who are pioneering some of these BTT segments. You've got guys like Xbox and Mitch and Goryuya, I suppose. I don't really think that Goryuya does very much free running, but these guys are definitely the quintessential optimizers. They're looking to basically fit the spin pounds in as little frames as they possibly can. They're looking to cut the corners in every place that they can. They're looking to take the very, very risky and, perhaps completely unthinkable routes to get places and make it happen for this BTT sheet. So mad props goes to those guys. But attention being directed back to this run for a second. Ekwan and LilKirbs only about a second apart here, and they are on phenomenal pace in their own rights. Ekwan was globing at 4:38 here, which is pretty darn close to the exit time he had in his previous race. And if LilKirbs is right on his tail, only just a mere second behind, both of these guys are going to be leaving at an exceptional time. Ekwan is going to be splitting Cascade at another 5:06, which is something absolutely unheard of. LilKirbs right behind with a 5:07.
Could be the redemption story of the year or the greatest tragedy mankind has ever written on Ekwan's side. Only time will ultimately tell, but we are certainly watching this Sand Kingdom with bated breath.
Yep. And literally the same pace, Ekwan, as he was on his last race. Getting the fast action guide, LilKirbs missing it there. So, if Ekwan plays the sand as clean as he did the first time and is able to eliminate the mistakes that he made in the Oasis, we are still potentially on a sub 10 pace for the sand exit. Ekwan the first through town here, grabbing this moon on the top of the cathedral and diving into the pipe very nicely.
Gotta just love this routing in this kingdom and how it goes from beginner to advanced. For those that, excuse me, that don't run this game, when you very first start out, you actually take a slightly different route to get to that moon on top of the tower. That's a little bit slower, but it puts you in perfect position to hit that bird and get the bird moon out of the way. As you progress through skill levels, though, you actually start moving the bird later and later in the kingdom. LilKirbs having a bit of an issue with that top of the dune moon that is I hate that moon so much. There's basically no indicator of where exactly it's at, and pretty much the only reliable method you have is counting power rolls after that little bush beforehand. But even then, that after a bunch of practice, you still get it kind of reliably. But eventually, and what you'll see these guys do, you actually get the bird on what's a pretty tight cycle at the very end of the kingdom after the Sphinx movement. And so it's just really interesting to me to see how much this kingdom in particular changes just from going through skill levels. Something like Lake, you don't really see that much of a difference between a beginner and an advanced runner unless they're doing Lake. Sand, it could be drastically different depending on who you're watching.
Certainly. And depending on the version that you're playing as well. Of course, these guys are playing on what is considered to be the optimal version of the game, the original version 1.0, which does have a couple of tips and tricks up its sleeve that 1.2 does not have access to. One of these tricks being the Sphinx clip that these runners are approaching right now.
Equan having, okay, I think that was a third try, and LilKirbs with a second try, advancing on Equan. So we've certainly got ourselves a race in the making.
Certainly. And Equan, oof, Equan is not going to like that coin count. He only snipped the top of those pyramid coins.
Yeah, 62 as compared to LilKirbs, 149. I believe this route still you need 200. He's going to have a free 50 over here, but making up that additional 90 before snow is going to be a little bit tricky. And taking that bonk there, that's going to potentially kind of make the bird timing a little bit weird. See how he's able to navigate the rest of this, though. And that movement right there through that section with the bullet bill is just so nice and clean. Used to we go over to the staircase and either do rolls up the staircase, some people, or do the backflip dives up the stairs, but that movement through that little hole there that you're normally supposed to use a bullet bill much later in the kingdom to get through is just so satisfying.
Yep. At the optimized level that these guys play, as long as they get that first try Sphinx clip on the double, they are going to be okay for the bird cycle. You can make quite a few seconds worth of mistakes and still manage to get the bird just fine. So you'll probably see the bird being right hanging over the ground pound moon as Equan approaches here. You can see, yeah, the bird is flying across the backside of the oasis. He's going to be just fine.
That's just beautiful. Like,
yeah. It's amazing how this game we were able to route this game in such a way that the bird is just passing by at the exact right moment that we need.
And even with like unintended tech, like I'm sure none of the developers really imagined that we were going to be taking the route these guys just took through that bullet bill hole. And I mean, from the perspective of a much less seasoned runner, that bird can be both your best friend and your worst enemy. I've never once gotten that bird to be there anywhere near as soon as these guys. Normally, as soon as I can see the bird, he's already right over that little ground pound platform, and I have to swing pretty far to the right to actually catch him. But obviously, these guys, both with their ability to do the Sphinx reclip to go right through, and hey, one of LilKirbs' friends is playing Fortnite. Maybe Kirbs should drop the speedrun and join him. Who knows?
Yeah, we're going to put this race on hold for a moment and play what is arguably the best game of all time. Let's get some victory royals going on in the chat.
Yeah, definitely need those big old number ones.
So Equan did have a little bit of a shakier Sand Kingdom than we did experience in the very first race he had today, LilKirbs, and it's kind of like clockwork. I think they both had some minor mistakes throughout the kingdom, but at the end of the day, the pace is basically the same with these guys, still only about a second apart, and we are approaching Lake Kingdom, where the Lake clip is really going to determine who comes out ahead here.
And it kind of shows how much the fight for sub-hour has heated up, that Lake Clip has been known about for such a long time, and just no one wanted to do it forever until Necro and I think it was, what was it, Timpani that? No, not Timpani. Another runner started doing it as well. Equan actually missing the roll into that cap to get up on top of this platform, so losing just a bit more time to LilKirbs here. but it's one of those things that kind of just got integrated into the run really out of necessity. It just saves enough time that it's really justifiable when you're trying to go for those seconds that are going to mean the difference between a 59 and a 1 on the timer.
Oh my goodness, and we are having a perfectly synced lake clip here, but Ekwon taking a bonk, and he's actually going to unintentionally fall back inbounds. He did get the checkpoint, but that's not going to help him in the situation. He does have to take kind of the old approach to this route. He is going to miss the lake clip route, and he's going to have to do Rango. That hurts. LilKirbs is going to be taking the lead here.
That's gotta just feel terrible after getting what's honestly the harder part of that trick, because I mean the ground pound jump in particular, one thing that people might not realize is that you're actually having to move just slightly out of the like you can't just have the stick neutral whenever you do that actual jump. You have to be moving so that I think it's so you don't bonk on the roof of the tunnel you just came through, and also so that you don't clip back in bounds. It's very tight movement there, and to get that and then clip back in bounds after the wall jump later, that's just, you gotta feel that.
Yeah, essentially what you need is a spot to ground pound on that is still out of bounds, but has solid ground below it. If you don't move the control stick at all, you will just what we call bathtub and fall directly back inbounds underneath this platform. So it's important that you kind of move a little bit, but not too far that you come back inbounds and have to reset up the clip again. So a very tricky set of movement if you're not familiar with it. And you know what actually did Ekwon in wasn't that at all. He was able to get that clip and the ground pound that he needed, but his cap dive went in the wrong direction and he was forced to dive back into the water. You hate to see this, but LilKirbs is going to be taking probably about a 25-second lead here.
Yeah, it just goes to show how much that late clip route saves. And you haven't even seen the full time save of it yet, because later on in the run, you're going to be able to skip that text box that would normally appear during Metro, telling you about how checkpoints work. So I think the late clip, obviously the late clip route as we're seeing here is still faster without that little save, but it's just a little bit of icing on the cake ultimately.
Certainly, kind of just like an unexpected surprise thrown on as well. But yeah, in Lake Kingdom itself, you can save about 5 to 6 seconds optimally using this late clip route. But then again, with the Cappy text being eliminated, Metro Kingdom is another 1.5 seconds or so. So there's definitely a lot of time to be saved using this route optimally. So not quite 25 seconds, but about 18 separates these guys now.
And that 18 can easily be made up during this wooded. So we're seeing curves with that. Just, man, I love that rolling rock movement. I tell you, the first time I saw the way that rolling rock is handled in a speed run, I was honestly mad because I remembered casually having to kick that rock like 17 times or something. It was just ridiculous. Gotta love that little optimization of going in first person when you talk to the shop salesman there. One thing that you may not realize at home, you actually have to have the left stick in a neutral position to do that. If you're moving at all, Mario will not go into first person. And so that can be really tricky to do quickly.
Yeah, you kind of need to time your rolls in a way that Mario stops moving right where you want him to be. Otherwise, you cannot get the first person off quite the way that you want. LilKirbs going to be the first to approach this nut clip. His setup looks great here. Did get the up warp and the shadow looks optimal. He is through the wall. His out of bounds movement here, just a little bit of a fumble, but not a big deal. Now he just has one more scary part. Now, LilKirbs opted not to go for this tree moon. Ekwon is going to be trying. Now, the last time that Ekwon got here, he did some weird phasing through the nut, but he is going to be able to break it open this time. So, you know, even though it looks like LilKirbs is taking even more of a lead, Ekwon just approaching nut clip now, he will be one moon behind, and he does have to get the story moon. That cutscene does take probably about 1.5 seconds longer than the route Ekwon is taking currently. So, as long as Ekwon plays clean, he should be able to make some time up here.
Oh, yeah. And, clipping back in bounds, though. Would have saved about 1.5 seconds or so. Oh, no, not... Okay, never mind. That part of the movement was at least somewhat intentional. But yeah, no, that's terrible right there. So, no. Ekwon pretty much... I think he's going to be playing just the standard route that LilKirbs is on right now, just replacing that internal moon with the tree moon. That it's one of those things where Ekwon made an opportunity for himself in this case to gain at least a little bit of time, and then just ended up losing it instead.
Yeah, and that's kind of the name of the game with some of these riskier strats. You know, you kind of have to play it the way that you got to. But yeah, Ekwon now does have to grab that story moon because he has no choice. He's going to miss the rock moon, and if he doesn't get the story moon, he's not going to be able to progress to the next kingdom. That being said, though, LilKirbs is on a fantastic run as of this moment. He has not made very many mistakes. The only one I can think of off the top of my head being that out of bounds movement just not really working in his favor, but he was able to back it up extremely quickly and only lost a couple of seconds.
Yeah, I mean, really what we're seeing is on LilKirbs' end, we're seeing very, very minute mistakes mean seconds of time loss, but in Ikwon's case, we're seeing just a few major mistakes resulting in, not sure if this is a word, deciseconds of time loss. Not quite minutes, but certainly, you know, in the groups of tens, you wouldn't just be handing out single seconds in this case. Commentator trying to pull out those very advanced, fancy English words.
Yeah, you're splitting up your seconds in a way that is very professional, of course.
Got to be scientific with this type of stuff. Speedrunning is equal parts art and science. That is for sure. We're seeing here LilKirbs come up on this side nut, and which is kind of funny too. If you really like these nut moons, as you get more advanced in the speedrunning routes, there are more of them in the wooded route. Initially, I think there are only 2 of them. There's the one in the maze. No, there's 3.
There's about 7 actually in the beginning.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about
there
it,
is quite a few.
Yeah.
You don't really think of them as nut moons sometimes because you just kind of blaze through the kingdom, but it does add one extra one to do this spiritless route. And I'm not really sure what happened with Ekwon here. It looked like he might have had a little bit of difficulty with the tower and might have actually taken a tumble off of the side. Had to wait for that flower road to come all the way back around. You know,
and get himself yet another of, or no, actually no. He just got back up with the elbower. But I've had it happen before where I missed that very top moon and accidentally ground pound and destroy the what are they called? Not elbows. I usually call them onions. I forget what their name is.
The uproots.
Right, yeah. I've had to go grab another one like midway through that tower before just because of an accidental ground pound after the release, and it's you hate to see that. You really do.
Ekwon really getting bullied by Wooded Kingdom here. You know, coming out of Lake, missed the Lake clip, had to go for the old route, kind of did the walk of shame in that kingdom, and this time going for the most optimal strats and getting bodied as a result, diving back inbounds and having to really back it up. This is really going to hurt. LilKirbs is still on the run of his life, getting an 18 2x exit in Wooded. That kind of stuff is unheard of in a race setting. He's just playing out of his mind, and Ekwon is going to be playing catch up here.
Flooded Pipes, honestly, is probably my favorite just little bit of Wooded because it really serves as a bit of a litmus test for newer runners to be like, hey, how exactly are you doing at running? Because, I mean, you can get, I think it's 3 different earlier cycles than just waiting for the water to rise. And the strat that we see both these guys do, obviously being the most optimal, but it's, again, one of those rooms that, like, over time, at first, you're using really, really basic stuff and just barely getting through it faster, and it still causes issues, but over time, the movement gets more fluid. You see that little jump to actually get to the secret moon become more and more advanced. And it's really cool to see the progression that this game offers from going from that very, very start of your first ever run to getting to these guys' level.
And that room is kind of fascinating in a way because it's not only, as you said, a kind of test to see if you're able to pull off some more advanced movement, but as your movement gets advanced enough, you can actually outspeed that room and make the cycle hard for yourself by going too fast. So by doing that room in the most optimal way kind of requires you to know exactly your pacing and how fast and slow the water actually rises. Because if you go too fast, you actually end up kind of making things more difficult for yourself, which can be a problem if you are a fan of some flashier and some speedier mechanics.
Yep, and you certainly don't want to slow down enough that you have to go for the effectively middle cycle where you're having to do that weird mid-air turnaround without a cap throw, where it's like you don't manage to catch the fuzzies where you would be jumping over a row. You have to jump like with the row. It's a little bit hard to describe, but I think if you've seen enough runs, you probably know the specific thing I'm talking about, which, like, if that's the jump you have to cap it off with, good luck on finishing on pace. Certainly a lot more difficult than the jump out of water cap throw dive that both these guys were able to execute. And LilKirbs making real short work of Lost Kingdom. This is, I mean, as we saw from the last run with Equan, this has been a choke point for so many major runners.
Yep, we did see Equan struggle a little bit with this kingdom. He was going for the dive to the butterfly with the optimal strat, didn't get enough height to make the jump onto the platform and had to go back to the beginning. And that's what makes Lost punishing, is that, you know, you get, oh my goodness, and he went for the dive vault here. Again, Equan really does try to go for some of this more optimal movement, and it is costing him again. I don't feel like he's learning his lesson in this race at all. You know, we're looking at him going for some of these more optimized movements, some that only save half a second.
Oh no! And failing meme tree whenever he was trying for oh, but LilKirbs taking that death gonna cost a couple of seconds, nowhere near as costly as what Equan's doing though.
Yeah, LilKirbs thankfully did grab the moon already, so it's fine. But
and the
yeah,
little thing
Equan,
too that I'm sure Equan's thinking about, but some people at home may not have quite realized, this is going to mean Equan's really, really hurting for coins going into snow. He's probably going to have to delay it until after Seaside.
oh certainly. In fact, at this rate, it's kind of questionable whether he's going to be able to gather enough coins at all. He might have, when he gets to snow, he might just have to submit and go for the Rango room instead of the shop. And oh my goodness, Equan, what is going on with your game right now?
Oh, how did that get a cat bounce?
What an incredible save. So,
what?
grabbing a pole is very similar to landing on the ground. It's kind of an unknown mechanic because not many people obviously are hugging trees, but you can grab a pole and get your cap dive back. So Equan using that to his advantage. Luckily, he grabbed that pole high enough in the air that he didn't trigger Klepto, because Klepto, while he triggers after landing on the ground, the actual trigger zone is actually quite a bit, shall we say, more invisible and more volatile. It's actually in the air, so if you were to dip low enough underneath that platform, he would have triggered Klepto after he hit the ground. So
right,
luckily
it's a box rather than just a platform. So
yes, exactly.
And yeah, I had actually thought that somehow he'd wall jumped off of that pole. I'd forgotten that that was a grabbable pole, so that makes perfect sense. But thinking quickly on his feet for a run that, I mean, it certainly is not his proudest, and it's going to take a lot of effort to be able to keep up with LilKirbs. LilKirbs with this beautiful indoor city hall movement until that bonk, Commentator's curse, coming in a little bit early. I mean, this indoor city hall, it's, for me personally, when I was first starting running this game, this would lose me a good 2 minutes easy. Mainly from this long jump here that we're about to see LilKirbs go into. In part because Small Ant makes it sound like you have to keep the stick oriented in the direction of the jump, but I've actually found that it's a lot easier if right whenever the camera starts turning, you release the stick, then throw Cappy so he goes in Mario's facing direction, and then input the dive with the stick still neutral, so he definitely will go in Cappy's direction, and then resume the stick movement right after inputting the jump, or the dive.
Yep, I would definitely recommend that for anybody trying to learn who is frustrated with that particular area. We've kind of, if you've ever heard of a value dive is basically throwing your cap and then trying to dive, but Mario goes in a different direction than your initial cap throw. We've kind of narrowed it down to it being a camera issue, and that room is no exception. So if you try and throw Cappy in a direction, holding the stick in one direction, and then also try and make Mario jump in the same direction while the camera is moving in a way that you cannot predict, it will cause problems for you. So the easiest thing to do is just to neutral throw and then start using your stick again once you've already initiated the dive, so that Mario is going in the right direction there. But yeah, cannot understate the kind of run that LilKirbs is having here. He did try to go for the speedy City Hall strategy. Didn't work out in his favor, but, you know, still looking at very minor mistakes overall.
I mean, he is a whole 2-cycle wiggler ahead of Equan at the moment, and Equan taking a death at the start of Indoor City Hall. What is going on his end of the game?
I can tell, you know, what the kind of game Equan is playing right now. He is frustrated. He already knows that he has made some major mistakes. He doesn't even care at this point whether he is able to play consistently and keep up. He is just going to go for all of the hardest things and hope that LilKirbs makes mistakes here. That is the game that I can predict from Equan moving into the rest of this game. And, you know, it, unfortunately for him, is not treating him well at all.
I certainly think you're right on that point, and it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of this run treats him, given how exactly he's seen the opening. Now let's see LilKirbs. This movement can be pretty tricky for a beginner to get to. I think my biggest problem was that it took me a long time around to see what was actually on the other side of that cage to really know, okay, this is why I'm getting hung up here. This is why I'm all of a sudden wall sliding here. And I think just actually seeing the layout of that cage made that trick just infinitely easier. And of course, LilKirbs making that throw look easy. I can personally attest. I think I've gotten Mario to hit the bench exactly like twice. Most of the time, it'll be like I'll hit the top of the bench, I'll hit right beside the bench. It's pretty difficult to actually get any sort of precise angle with that stick, and especially if, due to the way the camera's oriented when you collect the trash moon, if you end up for whatever reason having to like reorient yourself. I've actually thrown the opposite direction before by accident just because of how I've approached that pull from the trash moon.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one. All sorts of dram strategies, quote unquote, available and present in Metro Kingdom just to optimize a little bit of time. You see two right at the beginning of Day Metro. But yeah, LilKirbs running away with this one. Shoutouts to the Ghost Band in that room there.
Yeah, all you need is drum and bass. I mean, granted, in modern speedruns, I think it's. Wait, no, we still don't get the trumpet player. That's in Darker Side that I'm thinking of. But and that spin too. If you talk to any big runners, they talk about that spin in particular is like a 50-50. No one quite knows why that one's so hard to get out, but that one can be really difficult to get out for some reason. And someone's saying Equan probably made up for those 10 lost coins by doing Rango. Chat having a 5-minute delay, it's certainly interesting to see what they're thinking right at the moment. Okay,
Yep.
let's see how LilKirbs executes here. I also just really, really love seeing runners at the level that they're even replacing like standard longer jumps with vectoring. That really shows the level of optimization these guys are on. Normally, like at the very start where LilKirbs was going for that dumpster moon, you would normally start that with a long jump, but by vectoring just right, by angling Mario properly, the game doesn't properly cap his speed when he's moving at an angle. And so you're able to execute things like that, where just by doing a triple jump, you're able to go the distance of a long jump. And that actually, if you're kind of just starting with the game, I'd actually kind of recommend messing around with that mechanic in the frog room in particular. It's not super difficult to be able to omit one jump from your initial movement in Cap Kingdom by getting decent at that frog vectoring.
Yes, and the frog room is probably the easiest place to kind of practice that, for sure. One of the most notable places that it is used, but basically anytime you make a long and very high jump, anytime that you're hanging in the air for any more than a second or two, it is definitely optimal for you to kind of make a zigzag pattern in the air to vector your jumps and gain a little bit of speed, kind of abuse the way that this game handles airborne mechanics. But LilKirbs, again, cannot be understated. He is on the run of his life. He is getting back to the Odyssey. He is going to be globing at 29:30, meaning that he's leaving Metro sub 30 minutes. He's getting at 20:50. This pace is phenomenal. This is still with it, maybe not world record pace, but definitely on pace for at least a mid to low 1:00 time still.
Yup, and I mean, he is getting into kind of this last gauntlet of which you do have to kind of remember these guys just a tad unfamiliar with Seaside at the moment. Granted, the new skip isn't particularly hard, but it is still new, and so that's going to be different movement that could potentially trip these guys up. Then, of course, Luncheon needs not be really talked about. Everyone knows how much of a pain that can be, and of course, Bowser's still waiting in the wings.
And of course, as we approach the end of Day Metro, we always do have to kind of take a quick gander at the coin count. So LilKirbs on his way through snow, going to be just fine. Hasn't been incurring any deaths. Has been taking the optimal line through these kingdoms and is not going to have a problem. Equan, on the other hand, has not had such good luck. He is looking at a lot of deaths, a lot of and not to mention the deaths, but also the Sphinx room in the beginning didn't even treat him very well and give him many coins to deal with in the first place. Only has 19 coins. That's not going to be nearly enough. Even if he goes to Seaside first, he's not going to have the option to go to the snow shop. So it doesn't matter what kingdom he chooses, to be honest. He does have to do the Rango room, and hopefully he is weary of the amount of coins that he has and is able to make that decision before it's too late.
You know, I kind of wonder if had he kind of planned a little bit of it in advance, if he could have actually made up that coin deficit. Like, for instance, I think that stack that he had just passed on the pool on the rooftop was like a 20 stack, at least 15 coins. And there are numerous stacks like that in various places in the game. In Seaside, I believe you get 25, 30. Like, if he would have been kind of focusing on replenishing that coin count, it really would not have been much of an issue to hit 100, even with those, I think, 3-4 deaths so far.
And while you're not wrong, it is very slow to go out of the way for coins.
That is
and
true.
The Rango room is actually only about 2 seconds slower at an optimal level than the shop would be. So it definitely is kind of in Equan's best interest to instead just do the Rango room, in my opinion. But you do have a very good kind of point there. If you were maybe like 10 or so short, you could definitely kind of maybe throw your Cappy over to that stack by the pool and make something happen for you.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it was actually so much of a time save. And you don't think about it, but it's like the big I guess when you're trying to compare the two, both of them have 2 loads, I believe. There's the load of you having to skip the cutscene going into the Rango fight and then having to skip the cutscene right after. Really, the biggest difference is just having to watch that story moon cutscene at the end rather than just watching a standard moon like you would with the shop. But the fight is obviously really fast. It's a Rango fight. I was super happy when I found out that Rango had just a completely broken strat. And so, yeah, that definitely makes sense that, well, Equan obviously deciding on going to Seaside first, you know, maybe still retaining some kind of hope of getting those 80 coins, but I'm not sure where that hope is coming from. It certainly seems to be misplaced.
So you're probably not going to see him fight the Rango fight because that is incredibly slow. You're absolutely right about that. But there is a hidden moon in that room that you can get instead of the shop, because when you include the fact that we're doing Snowdram, it is not an issue anymore. In the days where Snowdram was not a thing, there was definitely a situation where if you didn't have enough coins going into snow, you were kind of hooped and you had to figure out a backup. But in the case of Snowdram, you just skip the shop, replace it with the secret in the Rango room, and then warp directly to the Odyssey. No Rango fight required, thankfully, because that fight is not only incredibly frustrating, but also very slow.
See, I don't know why. I was thinking of like the route still including that Rango secret moon. Because that's actually the route that I use is going for that Rango secret moon instead of Snowdram. So that was
exactly.
my mistake there.
No problem. Yeah, that is the moon in particular that Snowdram cuts out as a result. But that moon and the shot moon actually only about 2 seconds apart as far as optimization. So if you do not have enough coins, then you aren't losing an incredible amount of time. But yeah, LilKirbs actually, we haven't been focusing too much on his pace, but making extremely quick work of this Snow Kingdom and flying through. I haven't noticed any mistakes on his part. Excellent execution on the Snowdram here, and he's got to be happy with this run. This pace is phenomenal still.
Yep, this is certainly a run that he can be proud of, and Equan, I'm sure. I mean, this we talked about in the very beginning. This run's performance will be determined by if Equan can kind of push that previous run out of his mind, and it's become very crystal clear that he just wasn't able to. For whatever reason, maybe he was going through sand here and there, but as soon as that late clip failed, he obviously started to reach somewhat of an incline, and you would definitely not need a protractor to see the angle of tilt at the moment. That's for sure. And we see Equan with this brand new strat. So in case you haven't kept up super well with the community, someone discovered that if you recapture the Cheap in that situation, you can get him to clip out of bounds pretty easily. And by doing that, you're effectively adding a Sphinx Clip 2 into the run by going the back way for that moon that normally you'd need to go in the tunnel for. And it's actually like this reroute is really cool in part because that's kind of an awkward piece of movement going from the Blaine Northern Reaches moon, where you're having to spin attack on those 3 platforms. Going from that to the tunnel moon, you're having to flip your camera entirely 180 degrees. And the most optimal way of doing that is right after you've swam nearly down to the tunnel with it facing the opposite direction. So it's a really weird moon to be going towards, and the fact that the reroute kind of makes it a lot more natural is just an added bonus to the time save that it gives by being able to skip another slow moon.
Certainly.
And also, it's kind of fascinating how this reroute has entirely eliminated the rocket refresh that was a pretty substantial discovery whenever it came about.
And still has its place in a lot of other categories, and a very cool trick to kind of a party trick to show to your friends if you know how to do it. But that being said, it was very tricky, and there were a couple of risks associated with going for it. For example, you could miss some of the notes entirely and have to redo the entire challenge associated with that moon, which of course is a huge time loss. But this clip is I don't want to use the word, but it's free. There is really nothing to it at all. Basically, you just kind of put the fish on the edge of the stage and come back inbounds, and then by recapturing, you get just a tiny little bit more momentum towards the invisible wall, and just enough to kind of clip underneath the stage. So, yeah, the execution of this one is not very difficult at all.
Oh, LilKirb's actually missing the activation point there. Going to be losing probably 3 seconds or so just to having to go back for it.
And, you know, it's funny when you think about LilKirb's run right now and the fact that a mistake like that is something that we need to point out, because aside from things like this, his run has been flawless.
Right, you really love commentating over the runs where you're having to really nitpick for things instead of just, oh, he missed flower skip, he missed dram skip, dram
Yep.
strat.
Exactly. So LilKirb's having no problems with what we've kind of dubbed Sphinx Dip as a result of dipping into the water. I know we're very clever with our names in this community, but LilKirb's leaving Seaside. Ekwon probably just approaching the halfway point of Snow Kingdom. He has a lot of ground to make up here. Snow Kingdom, he has both of these sub rooms, and they are incredibly slow. Not a big fan of Snow Kingdom in a speedrun, in my opinion. Tends to be a little bit more on the aggravating side. But he's making his way through. LilKirb's finished with Seaside and on to Luncheon now. And
oh no, this poison room. I was about to say this poison room is the bane of so many runners' existence, and Equan proving that without me even having to say it. Oh, this long strat. Wow. I haven't seen that ever used. That's pretty cool. Which, I mean, normally that's because you'd never see a purpose for it, but really neat that was able to back up in that way, but kind of a at what cost moment. Because I mean, this room in particular, I think it was a really devilish decision of Nintendo to put in this little barrier that instantly kills you in a game that nearly everything takes 3 hits. Nope. Purple Lake, insta-death. Bye-bye, Mario. And it just... this room in particular, the movement isn't particularly complicated, but it's getting the little things. Like, it's very easy to long jump at just the wrong angle so that you instantly bonk against that very first cloud rather than going sliding past them on the left, and that's a death right there. Any sort of like mistake on jumping off the wooden platform, as we saw Equan take right there, that's a death. Like, so many little things in this room cause such ridiculously easy deaths, and even this Goomba room can actually present some challenges on occasion. I've had before runs where they were on pretty decent pace in snow. Going into this room, I missed the grab on the 3rd Goomba there, and then he proceeded to wander under the icicle and die. And at that point, there's nothing that you personally can do other than just jump off the stage and die yourself.
Yep.
And that's just the worst feeling.
Yep, that is the truth, and that is how it goes sometimes. So
it's the way of the road. Sometimes she goes, sometimes she don't. And with that, let's see how LilKirbs makes it go moving into the second bit of Luncheon.
Oh no, Ekwon forgetting that he doesn't have coins. Okay, he does realize now. He did go into the shop, at least didn't talk to the shopkeeper, but yeah, he does have a very unfortunate amount of coins and does have to do this Rango room backup, but he did forget. He fell into muscle memory and approached the shop, so you know, again, just kind of hemorrhaging time away here. And you really do hate to see it, but it's very apparent just how much frustration Ekwon currently has as a result of that last race.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really, really apparent now. When they moved into Snow and Seaside, it wasn't exactly apparent how much of a lead LilKirbs had, but at the moment, it is looking very, very grim for Equan's chances. But as we saw from that last race between Equan and Necro, it's not over until they're at the very, very end of this game. LilKirbs still has to deal with the escape no matter what, and if he decides to go for 2D skip, that could be something that allows Equan to actually have a chance in this race again. But again, Equan missing it twice in that last race, you know, it's still anyone's game, but it certainly looks very, very appealing for LilKirbs. I would love to be in his position at the moment, but you know, we do still have about 20 minutes before the end of this run, and anything truly can happen in this game.
Yep, you're absolutely not wrong about that. LilKirbs is the king of luncheon, currently has the best time posted for this kingdom. So, you know, he is right at home in this kingdom, is not making any mistakes here, making it look incredibly easy, of course. He does have the turnip clip upcoming, though, and that is going to be the number one hurdle that we've seen some runners struggle with here.
Flower skip was any indication, or sorry, not flower skip, that fork flicking room. He's playing on an insane level. It may just be because I'm complete trash at that room, but man, that was awesome. I can't tell you that one too, how many times I've had runs where I just haven't been able to get the up throw out at the very, very end, and it caused you to fall all the way down, die. Congrats, you lost a minute and a half. And making short work of turnip clip there. I think it's really neat how, you know, the moon cutscene plays inside this little cage, and then the game just goes ahead and still breaks it for you. It just doesn't care.
Yep, phenomenal stuff. LilKirbs on ridiculous pace. We'll have a little bit better of an understanding of just what kind of pace that is as he approaches the end of this kingdom, but I would be very surprised if it wasn't something like a low 100 still. This is phenomenal running by LilKirbs so far.
Yeah, it's very rare you get to say this, but LilKirbs could actually have PB potential with this run.
It would be quite the run for sure. Of course, mistakes like this don't really help, but not wasting any more. Not wasting any more than like a second or two here, but
oh, but taking an overdrive there. Let's see if he's almost able to get the running back up. Come on, come on. Okay. He's able to get back up there, but PB and 100 certainly did.
No, 100 is definitely still possible. I'm not sure about that.
I wasn't thinking properly. For some reason, I was thinking of 10000. And
oh, yes, yes.
That died as soon as the power button was pressed.
Yep, nobody quite accomplishing quite the feat like that yet, but you never know. One of these days, it could very well be that the first 00 happens in a race for GSA. That would be hot, but you just you never really can expect these things. But LilKirbs again, still on a very solid run.
Let's see, nice triple jump movement here. I think he just barely missed the. Or wait, no, never mind. I forgot exactly how that Great Moon worked for just a moment. Okay, so we see LilKirbs finishing out Luncheon, and you know, I think LilKirbs is actually going to be able to be a full Ruined Kingdom ahead.
Yeah, if not a full Ruined Kingdom, pretty close. We are still looking at essentially a 1002x pace here, very high 1002x if Kirbs plays the rest of this run phenomenally, which he has been shown to do. Maybe not a PB, but yeah, again, 100 is still very possible here. Extremely solid running from LilKirbs. But we're entering Ruined Kingdom. What a fantastic place to be.
Yep. You know, it should be free, but we've actually seen Equan himself prove in GSA races before that may not be the case. And it's kind of interesting to point out the previous times that this sort of thing has happened to Equan. For example, in GSA's first any percent tournament, his first loss was actually due to a death in Ruined Kingdom. And it just seems that for whatever reason, when he's on a great run like that, he can't seem to clinch it through the end game.
Yeah, it kind of falls into the consistency, and I think that Equan plays a little bit on momentum, and sometimes when you play on momentum, you try and go for some of the harder things to keep that momentum alive, and this game is not very nice to you when you continue to try and push the luck of this game. So we've seen it happen with even less riskier strats than the one Equan's going for, so you never really know, and sometimes your luck just runs out.
I mean, talking about this game being unforgiven, it's not a secret at all that getting into this game, it's slightly more forgiving. For instance, in like Mario 64, just mainly because of the higher density of polygons in the geometry that allows for there's just a little bit more leniency for different stuff. If you think of the number of jumps in Mario 64, where it's like you're jumping from under an awning and you have to manage to get on top of said awning. You don't really see a whole lot of stuff that's just completely breaking the architecture like that in Odyssey. But what you do see instead is a lot of reliance on really precise stuff at this really high level that can be just as costly. I mean, when you're playing this game at a super high level, that's really where the cracks start to show. Oh, Equan missing the impossible jump there. That's not what you want to see ever to end a Luncheon Kingdom. But it's at this very top level, you start seeing those really, really unforgiving strats that put this game truly, I would say, in a league with Mario 64 in terms of how good they are as speed games. This game certainly deserves its current popularity.
Yep, the overall aesthetic of it, of course, being just how many movement options are available to you and the routing opportunities available from picking different moons and traversing the kingdoms freely as opposed to being spit back out at the beginning like previous 3D Mario titles. So it makes it a very fun experience. And of course, we've picked the optimal routes, but that doesn't mean that other categories can get kind of creative with which moons you pick up and when you do that.
Oh, absolutely. Once you start getting into even World Peace has a drastically different route from this. And for example, Darker Side, it has a lot of its first pass in common with World Peace, but again, still a lot of different stuff that's just done mainly because of that mindfulness of having to go through every kingdom a second time. And this game has just really it's shown just beautiful things about the community behind 3D Mario games. And I mean, gotta say too, Cappy has just been a genius decision from a design perspective. When you start kind of thinking to yourself of what can you do to expand upon the basic Mario foundation that would make the game more fun and actually add another level of creativity and movement, and you're hard pressed to find something anywhere near as good as Cappy. Flood tried to answer that question back in 2001, kind of had a split reaction, but I think Cappy has a much more uniform, this really works reaction. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, Cappy is just an amazing addition to this game. I've actually said before, and I still believe this. In some ways, this game kind of shows you what a really good 3D Sonic game would look like. If you imagine like Mario's rolling movement just sped up a bit, maybe a couple of movement options changed a little bit here and there, you can really see where this game really lays the groundwork for just an amazing 3D platformer, no matter what character is actually in the driver's seat. I think the most exciting thing is really just seeing what developers come up with after they get their jaws off the floor at seeing what Nintendo has done with this game.
Yeah, certainly going to be a hard thing to beat in the future for Mario, I think. How do you really top something like this?
Yeah, as Donkey once famously said, other developers are looking at Mario Odyssey and just looking at each other like, what are we even doing here?
Yep. All right, LilKirbs here with the moon shards. Perfect execution. What more or less could we really expect? And you were right. Equan is a full Ruined Kingdom ahead, or sorry, behind. LilKirbs was leaving and fade out right before Equan has his fade out in Luncheon Kingdom. So yeah, we are looking at about a 3.5 minute split between these guys, which means that it's essentially up to LilKirbs to make some sort of mistakes and Equan to play out of his mind in order for Equan to close the gap and make it possible for him to get any points from this game. And oh no, he got the dive on the dragon. Commentator's curse, I suppose. In a situation like this, he was on the very last phase of the dragon. He's going to have to do that entire fight again. That's 2 minutes worth of extra time that he's going to have to do again, putting him almost in the realm of like 5 minutes behind. There's really nothing you can do at this situation. We'd have to hope that LilKirbs falls in the 2D section of the moon maybe like 5
LilKirbs would have to
times.
crash. Like, that's just straight up. Either he would have to fall for the pit at the end of Escape, or he'd have to just straight up have the first Switch crash ever in a race. And, I mean, jeez.
Yeah, you know, you can definitely see the tilt in Equan's play. Just everything is going wrong for him right now, and you hate to see it. LilKirbs, on the other hand, this would have, even if Equan was playing really, really well, this would have been a hard race to beat. We are looking at the best race time in this league so far being a 1:00:50. LilKirbs still on pace, from what I can see, to beat that currently.
Yeah, and I mean, a little bit of that, I'm sure, is slightly due to the Seaside reroute, but it certainly has to be said, LilKirbs has really, no matter what Equan he was facing, whether it's this one or the most consistent, just greatest Equan, he brought his A game today. That cannot be denied.
Certainly.
So let's see here how exactly LilKirbs is able to finish out this run. You know, I'm thinking that we're going to be seeing a really, really top-notch mech from him. Obviously, at this level, you're going for the absolute fastest strategies, but this certainly isn't anywhere near over for LilKirbs. Even though he's so far ahead, he does still has to keep his head on and still play to the best of his ability to make sure to clinch this out.
That's the hardest part of perhaps Bowser's and Moon Kingdom specifically. Not so much that they are the hardest kingdoms to execute, but they are the hardest they just so happen to be at the end, and playing under pressure like that can be potentially your downfall, because, you know, one missed input, especially in a position like this where LilKirbs has to kind of make a very scary jump over this ridge. He is going to be okay here, but just a good example where one missed input is all it would take to kind of ruin the entire momentum of this kingdom and send you back quite a ways. So you do have to be on your A game, and you do have to be tight on your inputs, or else things can go south very quickly.
And look at that Optimo Primo movement, completely skipping over those metal blocks. As a very starter, you would hop off of those metal blocks to put yourself in position to avoid having to do the recapture before you get up to the circle. But I mean, LilKirbs still kind of showing a little bit of his stuff. I'm sure that's just the strat he always uses, but still, it really just goes to show how much work these guys have put into optimizing this game. Let's see how this mech fight is going to go. Beautiful spin pound. How did he even have time to input that spin? Wow.
Yep. Phenomenal reflex and dexterity from these runners with the spin pound buffers coming out of dives. You know, you see that a lot in the run, and at a casual perspective might kind of look okay, might look easy, might look executable, but really there are a lot of inputs being had in this short amount of time. So LilKirbs going for Harriet third here, gets the hit, is going to be setting himself up for target acquired, and gets the hit. He is flying through this game. He is on phenomenal pace still, and again, potential league record pace still as we approach the Moon Kingdom.
Yeah, it comes down to Moon and that escape. We've seen it take so many runs out of our hands before. Let's see what this one has in store, but man, oh man. I also just have to point out, everyone, let's have some F's in the chat for the Pro Controller stick boxes and these guys' hands. I mean, the sticks, I wouldn't even want to start trying to count how many spins you have to do throughout this run in order to execute all of the fast spin pounds and such. And I mean, at a certain point, you just get really, really good at flicking that stick around really, really fast. And so, I mean, I would love and also hate to just see the amount of where these guys get on a stick within like just a month of having to do those spins. Because, I mean, on my personal end, there's a noticeable bit of residue forming on the left stick as opposed to the right stick of just that kind of plastic getting a little bit ground away from the outside of the gate. And, you know, I think it's really important to note, too, how this game, even though spin pounds are a very important mechanic, they're not... Oh, Equan missing that moon shard, too. Normally, those moon shards have a pretty insane homing hitbox, but in this case, just not working out for him. But, Jeez, I kind of lost my train of thought. Oh, right. Even though this game has spin pounds as an important mechanic, it's not like the end all be all thing that you're just constantly wiggling your stick in a circle. And I think that's another thing that's made this become kind of the premier modern Mario speed game. Since there have been some other Mario games in the past that have relied a whole lot on that spin jump, and to be honest, it's an inconvenient move, especially when you're starting. But over time, it becomes really the way of optimizing your time. And in this game in particular, it's not overused. It doesn't overstay its welcome, which I think is really, really nice.
Something that you don't really use at a casual level anyways, so something that can be kind of overlooked as a casual player. But yeah, at the top level, we definitely abuse our pro controllers quite a bit. And if you play on Joy-Cons, it's even worse. Those sticks were not really made to last. So yeah, I have personally already gone through about 2 pro controllers myself, just from the abuse that you put on these sticks. And I was talking to EB Games. They didn't really follow speedrunning very much, but that's where I kind of replaced my controllers, because they do offer a replacement service, I suppose you could say. And they were saying the only people that really come in and replace their controllers quite as often are people who play sports games, which kind of makes sense, I suppose. So we're putting the same kind of pressure on our controllers doing a lot of these spin pounds and a lot of these quick movements that people who play fast action sports games tend to as well.
Which, I mean, I'm sure that's not at all a surprise that we're playing at a higher level than a Madden 2019 player, for instance, with more wear on the controller.
And now LilKirbs approaching the second Bowser fight, the refight here. And his Moon has looked phenomenal. Has had very... actually, I can't even recall any mistakes that he's been making. This late game has just been on fire. So we do think that PB is probably not possible with this pace, but he is playing solidly, playing to the best of his ability. As long as these Bowser phases go well, he is going to be grabbing the hat on the second phase here, which is arguably the hardest. You know, as long as these Bowser phases go well, it's just an escape sequence, and that is all that's really going to separate him from potentially the league world record, and still at this pace, possibly the best race record we have seen in GSA so far.
Could certainly be. It'll be really exciting to watch how he finishes out this run. Aquan, meanwhile, still having all sorts of problems with what should ultimately be fairly basic things, like that topper fight really, really nearly cost him. And so we're seeing this, which I'm really, really glad that this type of movement was found for these Bowser fights. It makes them so much, it really makes them free at the end of the day. As opposed to having to actually intercept the hat and then time the motion control fling to get Cappy to return to Mario with that hat. And it's just, it's a whole thing. It's not that great. It's just, ugh. But instead, now we just do a backflip and the game kind of just works for us.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that sometimes, you know, you think that the fast strats would be the harder strats, but sometimes they just make things easier.
Yep, and I really wonder how long it took from Cappy being able to capture things before someone at Nintendo was like, why don't we have Cappy capture Bowser? Because honestly, the thought had never really crossed my mind before this escape sequence. And of course, I'm sure everyone else was like this too. My mouth was on the floor. I was like equal parts surprised and excited and just stupefied by, I get to play as Bowser right now.
Yeah, there was a part of me, like, after I've played Mario games a very long time, and they've kind of been having this gimmick of allowing the gamer to believe that the game is over, but then it's not really over. A lot of the new Super Mario Brothers games did that. They present you with a Super Mario Brothers 1 style fight, and then follow it up with kind of like a remix where you kind of have to go through a stage to beat an even larger Bowser all of a sudden. So yeah, Nintendo's been kind of doing this but it's not over yet types of moments, and they really went above and beyond with this particular game. They bait you into thinking that you're done by going to Bowser's Kingdom. Psych, the wedding is actually on the moon, and you have to go and fight Bowser on the moon. And then you do the final fight with Bowser, and you think, okay, it's done, we finished it. But there is still one final thing to do, and that is to escape the inner crumblings of the Moon Kingdom, which we see LilKirbs doing here in the pillar room. Did get that first pillar nice and quick, breaking the third one now onto the final pillar. He's just got a couple fireballs to go. This has been phenomenal pace in this pillar room. And as he knocks down that final pillar, going to be making his way onto the platform. No invisible wall this time. He's playing it smart, busting open this pillar. And it looks like he might even come in with a 2x time. Oh my goodness, this is incredible. We're looking at a 1:00:26 final time. That is a GSA record as well as a league time. Phenomenal pace, tying his PB, in fact. Absolutely crazy.
Oh my god! And that is PB. Let's see, PB without the Seaside reroute. So, but man, he's got to be at least a little bit happy now. He's got well, I was gonna say now he's got accurate splits with the Seaside clip, but I'm not sure. Is LilKirbs one of the ones that uses sub splits? I know like Chaos does, for instance. But...
A lot of the top runners have been adopting that idea. I think only a handful don't anymore. But yeah, LilKirbs coming in with the ridiculous hot time here.
Oh, that's hot. That's
phenomenal. Hot. Ekwon, meanwhile, still working his way through. He is just approaching the Moon Kingdom. Very unfortunate circumstance for him. I think you could tell that the nerves were really getting to him through the end portion of that race. And I mean, you know, sometimes it really does go like that. And Ekwon's not going to be happy about it. But joining us in the call now, we do have the victor of this race, the one and only LilKirbs, who has put on an absolutely phenomenal performance in this race. So LilKirbs, if I'm not mistaken, this is a tie on PB, is it not?
It's actually half a second off because I retimed it to a 1:00:26. It's probably like 0.3 actually, but I wouldn't really care if it was a PB or not. But the main thing that killed that nearing the end, I was actually tied with my PB in Seaside, and I knew I had like 6 or 7 seconds in Bowser to save. But then that thing at the end of luncheon happened, so I wasn't too confident. But glad I pulled this out at least. Good race record.
Yep, and I mean, against any, obviously against any other competitor in the league's history, this would have been a win. But against someone like Ekwon, obviously you knew you had to bring your A game. What were you thinking going into this race, and were you kind of watching a little bit during to see where you were, and if so, like what were your thoughts during the race about that?
Well, before the race, I saw a couple people in chat questioning if I could get out of early game properly. So I just wanted to show them I could. And I had a pretty decent early game overall. I think it was a 9:56 sand for me on banner splits, which is alright. And it was like a 19 or 18 wooden, which is like a second ahead of my PB. So I thought it was a good run overall. Kind of fell apart, like lost through Seaside, or like snow or whatever, but that's alright.
I mean, if this is what falling apart looks like, then I want the kind of falling apart that you're a part of, because a 1:00:27 is not only the best race time that we've ever seen in GSA in history, but also within 17 seconds of the world record pace. So very solid performance by LilKirbs in this race.
Yeah, I mean, you say you were falling apart, but certainly Ekwon having a lot more issues than you were having. Was Ekwon's performance in that last race any sort of a, not motivator isn't quite the right word, but did that have any effect on your mentality going into this race, thinking, okay, you know, he's not exactly in the best form at the moment, or were you going in like, I'm no matter what I'm facing, I'm just giving it my absolute best?
Well, for any race, I'm obviously gonna give it my best, or try my best. But when I saw that he had a pretty good run overall, except for that ending with 2D, which is pretty much the same exact time loss I had with the invisible wall. So that was a little sad to see. But in the past, when I was against Chaos in the finals of the Any Percent tournament, and I had to go through multiple races, I know for a fact that I personally can't play well the second time. Usually the first time I'll give a lot of my energy, but the second one I'm going to be a little bit more fatigued. So I wasn't too sure if Ekwon could hold it up overall, so I just tried my best on my own run and see what happens. So I'm happy with the result.
As anyone would be. I mean, it's certainly nothing to scoff at whatsoever. And I mean, just absolute GG's, beautiful run. Is there any particular kingdom that you were especially proud of throughout that run? Because you've got a pretty good pick. There were a lot that were done just at absolute top level.
Let me actually think through the run. Lake was pretty good overall. I got the first try clip, so I'm happy about that. Lost, everything went well except for the ending, where I didn't hold down, and I actually got like stuck on Cappy, so I ended up bonking on that wall while I was trying to go for the up throw. So, I mean, overall, I'm happy with that Lost. Seaside was pretty good overall, a good showcase of the clip. Overall, I just played well, no major mistakes, so I'm happy.
I mean, it certainly showed. I forget where exactly it was at. I think it was some point. Yeah, it was toward the end of Seaside where I think there was a little bit of an issue with swimming or something, and we were kind of talking about. We pointed it out, and then we realized like this is such a minor mistake, but with the way that you were playing, that's all that we had to point out. We had to be just super nitpicky to have anything to say about your run. So, I mean, thanks for that. That's these are certainly the races that I'm sure the people at home love seeing, and I'm sure you love performing as well. So GG's and thanks so much for that.
Yeah.
And with this victory, obviously we are well into the realm of full and total points. LilKirbs coming in with the shutout in this race. Ekwon finally finishing up his run with what looks to be a 106.42, perhaps 43, as he zips out of the wire here. And
not even stopping his timer. That is an immediate sign of some tiltage.
Yeah, we can only imagine what is going through Ekwon's mind, but luckily we do have him in the call for a couple of comments. Ekwon, what happened, bub?
Well, yeah, the reason I didn't stop my timer is I'm playing the sub splits, and I don't want to split for every split, so I'm not actually at the end of the game right now. But I had a lot of fun that race. That was probably the most fun I've had playing this game in a very long time. So it was great, and I wasn't going to beat Curves anyway, so I don't know. It was good.
That
That's
being
really
said, we
interesting to
do
say.
understand. I can kind of understand where you're coming from with a mentality like that. You obviously, as you kind of faltered through the beginning of the run, you might have just been going to play and see what you could accomplish and go for all the hardest things and see if it worked out for you. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of them did, which is why we are looking at a 106.20 time. But that being said, I can understand where you're kind of coming from. But what is your mentality on giving up the total amount of points that are possible to LilKirbs here? Are you not upset by that?
Not really. I mean, even if like after Wooded, I was like a minute behind, I would have ended up with like probably like a 103 anyway. So I'm not sure that it would have made that much of a difference if I like really played safe and didn't do some of the things that I did. But overall, I don't think this is really going to change your standing that much, much less at least than dying in 2D twice in the last race. But that's besides the.
Yeah, I do suppose you do have a point there. It is hard to contest a 100.27, especially when you look at a run that is already kind of making mistakes within the first 20 minutes. So there is only so much you can do. And, I think as long as you had fun at the end of the day, that's kind of what we go for. So GG's to both runners. Of course, these league races are building up to a bit of a climax coming your way in April. We have the live event showcase for Global Speedrun Association called PACE, happening live in Laurel Park in Maryland, where you will be seeing the finals for this league, the Super Mario 64 70-star League, and the finals for the Celeste League live. The top 4 runners from each of those leagues is going to be facing off live in front of you with live commentary, of course, from some hot commentators. We also have a couple of showcases happening. So !tickets to learn a little bit more about the event. But in the meantime, it was a pleasure doing some commentary with you, Electric. Thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely, and same to you. Always a pleasure to be on the mic with really anyone. And thanks for pointing out Pace. I will personally be there, so if you would like to see my hilariously ugly face in person, that would be the opportunity to do it. And with that, I believe there is there one more race after this?
We do have a couple more things coming your way. So, in approximately 5 minutes, Battle for Bikini Bottom, some of that no SBA tournament coming your way. So, stay tuned for that. That will be all for Super Mario Odyssey for the day. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.
Yep, definitely stick around for Battle for Bikini Bottom, especially if you played it as a kid. It is an amazing speed game. And if you won't be sticking around, thanks so much for watching, and we hope to see y'all again on this channel. Bye-bye.